News Talk 96.1 and AM 1180 KERN.
We had Dr. Bridge Bombay for the Centric Health sponsored segment here on the show. He's been joining us talking about the COVID, and now we've entered into a new phase as the vaccine, the Pfizer, Moderna vaccines have been opened up across the country, or at least at the recommendation of the CDC and adopted here in California, that people 65 and over will start to get it. That started yesterday. I got my vaccine, my first shot yesterday, and I will tell you, at the Centric Health Urgent Care on Buena Vista, they said they had over 700 calls. So it's going to be, people are lining up to get this thing. Even though there's still a lot of reluctance among people to take this thing, there are plenty who will. I want to welcome Dr. Bridge Bombay back to the program. Dr. Bombay, how are you, sir?
Richard, I'm very well. Did you survive the first dose?
Yes, she works at a senior care facility, so she got hers there. Yeah.
No, but did you survive yours?
Oh, did I survive? I thought you said to my wife. Yeah. Yeah. Easy peasy, Doc. I mean, I'm a little sore. But no sore than normally. I mean, pretty much what you described after you didn't have any complications, did you?
No, none.
Yeah. Good. When I was listening to these things, the nurse said, I said, how crazy has it been? This is around 4:00. She said, we've had 7 people call to schedule appointments. And I'm thinking, wow, what a rush. And then I started to think about the policy of using up all the vaccines you have in stock. We talked a little bit about this last week. And not holding anything in reserve for the second shots, because you want to get as many people inoculated with the first shots as possible. Can you talk about that, the wisdom of that? I believe that you said you did agree with it. Well, what might happen if there's a supply chain issue and there's not enough to give people the second shots?
So, Richard, let's first look at the background. What is the scientific evidence that suggests you need 2 shots? So we're all familiar with the MMR, the shots kids get. If you take only 1 shot, there is a 60% benefit. If you take 2 shots, there's a 96% benefit. The efficacy goes from 60% to 96%. And if only 1 shot is taken and people don't take the second shot, there are clusters that emerge in that segment of population. So it's necessary to follow the science. And the science is the first shot typically will create an adaptive response by stimulating two kinds of cells, B cells and T cells. The B cells are the ones that create antibodies that typically last for a few weeks and then they fade away. The T cells are the memory cells that remember what happened and will respond to the threats of the virus or the bacteria down the line when the same infection recurs. The first dose generates a certain amount of immune response. The second dose is much more effective. It's called anamnestic reaction. The quality and the quantity of response is much better, and the durability of the response is much longer. So it's imperative to follow the science. What happens is, in medicine, 2 plus 2 is not always equal to 4. So what makes sense has to be tried in real life in patients, and that's why we practice what's called evidence-based medicine. Sometimes 2 plus 2 is not equal to 4 in my field, and you just can't be fast and loose with the facts. When we go and look at the data from the BioNTech or the Pfizer vaccine, the people in placebo group and in the vaccine group had no protection for the first 12 days. So there was an equal number of infections for the first 12 days. The graphs started separating after 12 days, and between 12 days to 21 days, there was almost 80-90% protection. And similarly in Moderna's case. But the problem is our clock of knowing what happens after a single dose stops at 21 days in case of Pfizer and 28 days in case of Moderna. So it looks likely, if you use common sense as a substitute for data, that the need for second dose is there, but it may not be imperative at week 3 or week 4. We may have latitude. We may have flexibility in administering the second dose at somewhat later day to reconcile the disparities between the production, distribution, and vaccination, all the supply chain issues that you mentioned. But that's a bit of a leap of faith that this will add up. As I said, you have to prove the best medicine is evidence-based medicine. You have to balance that against the possibility of limiting second dose to the people who already received the first versus expanding the access across the board and just not following the science in a puritanical manner. There are people who are on both sides. They say you cannot create your own evidence when you have evidence-based 96 or 95% efficacy following the protocol by the company. How dare you change? How do you know if you will still maintain the 95% benefit? On the other hand, you say there is a pandemic raging, and if you have 80-90% efficacy with the first dose and stagger the second dose a little later, we may be better as a society. So this is a debate, and nobody will know the answer to. But I think as a nation, if I'm looking at the supplies and the distribution, it looks like we already made a commitment not to reserve the second dose and kind of vaccinate en masse as many as we can, and then hope that the production keeps up and the distribution keeps up, and the second dose will be available in due time for the recipients of the first dose.
I hope so. Talking to Dr. Bridge Bombay of Centric Health. Dr. Bombay, now I'm obviously not a medical professional, but wouldn't it be easier to just give one dose? I mean, I know this is one of these 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, but if you just took one large dose and you didn't force people to go back, why wouldn't that work as opposed to having people come back? Because I'm assuming there's going to be a percentage of the people, and I don't know if you have a percentage in mind, that aren't going to show up for the second dose.
The reason for that is, it's like, Richard, when you were a student of history in Georgia, you didn't remember the book the first time you read. You needed to read it the second time. So the memory is better on revision than on the first time. The same thing with immunology. The first dose is going to give you a degree of benefit. The second dose is much better, much more efficacious, much more durable. So it's necessary to have the second dose for a better qualitative and quantitative immunological response. Can you stretch that? The argument isn't about having the second dose or not having the second dose. The argument is, can the 3 weeks period be 7 or 8? Can the 4 week period be 7 or 8 for the second dose? And the logic dictates that it could be, but again, we don't have the evidence. We may have to take the leap of faith and go that route, vaccinate as many as we can, and hopefully the production and the distribution will keep pace, albeit on a longer time scale.
Right. When these 2 doses, and you just talked about how they work together, are they the same dose? Is it this? Are you getting the exact same amount, the exact same whatever it is they're putting in your veins?
Yes, exactly.
Both times?
It's the same. It's the same thing.
Okay.
The first dose is a primer. The second dose is where you get the most benefit.
Okay. All right. And if let's say, and I'm not trying to borrow trouble here, my mother always told me, she said, don't borrow trouble. Don't worry about things you have no control over. However, I ignored her advice, and I've been doing that for years. So let's assume that there's some kind of problems with the supply chain, and you get a lot of people who have gone 28 days, they've had the Moderna vaccine, they're supposed to go back, and let's say we run out of supply, there's something happens and they can't get it. You talked about stretching it out. Is there a way to go back? I mean, if you're not sure of the efficacy at that point, do you go back and start all over, or what would you do?
I think that's where, as I said, it's a leap of faith. We will find out. There isn't any way you would know without actually going that route and figuring things out. And as far as the supply demand equation being disturbed, it's already being disturbed in Europe. So there's more demand than supply. And I think we're going to get at the same place here pretty soon, because initial bottlenecking, as I discussed last time, was at the place of vaccination. And that bottlenecking, those deficiencies are being addressed. For instance, today we are vaccinating 600 people in Heart Hospital. Okay. And about 70 or 90 people at the urgent care. As soon as the fairgrounds open up, we're going to have a tent there in association with the county to help vaccinate as many as we can. But that's going to put a strain on the availability of the vaccine, and a lot of the states are already experiencing that. So that's why I think from my perspective, that's a place we don't need to be. I think we need to take on the Defense Production Act, and there should be no reason when we have an effective vaccine not to put all hands on the deck. This is a good time to bring in the Defense Production Act, and let's
right because I mean because these companies are feeding the world here. I know there's some other vaccines out there, but these seems to be the big ones on the block. Do you know what percentage of people just won't go back by your experience of vaccines in medical research? Or is there a number? Is it 5%, the number of people who get the first vaccine for whatever reason, they forget about it, or they get sick and don't want to go back, they just don't go back for number two?
It's a good question, and I don't have the answer to that. But I do have the answer that 100% of the people won't go back. There will be a certain amount of slippage, and I don't know if that number is 5% or 10%, but there will be slippage. And as long as we have 80 or 90% people who get both the shots, you really don't need to vaccinate every human being in the world. You just need to vaccinate enough so that the virus doesn't bounce off from one person to another.
Yeah, right. Dr. Bobby, can you give us some advice on how we behave after we get the vaccine? Understanding with the understanding that the first getting one shot is only going to be 50% to 60% protection. But let's say even with two shots, here's a question I want to start off with. When you get the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, you can still get COVID, but it just reduces the symptoms. Is that correct? Most people will get asymptomatic, and if they get symptomatic, it will be mild. Yes. Okay, so if you're asymptomatic and you're not feeling it because you've gotten the vaccine, can you spread it to somebody who has not been vaccinated? That's a question that hasn't been answered yet, but it's under study, and that's the main concern. So even if you're safe, you don't get sickness yourself, you still may be carrier, and like typhoid Mary, spreading the disease to others. So that's a question that hasn't been answered yet, but it remains a concern. Okay, well then that would play into my next question. I was going to ask you, how do we behave? I mean, if in fact we don't know if we're still shedding this, then we should still be wearing masks and practicing some kind of social distancing until what point we reach herd immunity? I mean, what's your advice for that? First of all, go back to the first 12 days of Pfizer vaccine. There was no difference. Both sides, the ones who got placebo and vaccine, were equally exposed to the risk of infection. So if Richard Bean got a vaccine yesterday,
you have no protection for the next 2 weeks. You have to remember that.
Okay.
And the protection begins incrementally after that. And we know for the next 3 weeks, after next 2-3 weeks, you will have 80% protection. But we don't know if it's going to continue for 2, 3, 4 months without the booster dose. And that hopefully will do it for a year or two. The behavior will not change. You have to still understand no shield is impenetrable. If you are exposed to excessive viral loads in closed, crowded settings with a lack of adequate circulation and loud music and stuff like that, the viral load may overwhelm the vaccination itself. You still have to maintain till we have achieved herd immunity. There isn't going back to 2019 for most of the 2021.
Yeah,
we still have to behave as if we don't have vaccine.
Oh man, we're not out of the woods for a long way. Hey, can you talk very quickly about, there was a doctor of all things, I believe in Miami, had a bad reaction to, I believe, the Pfizer vaccine. Can you talk about that and what we know about it?
That's a very tragic story. There was a gentleman in his, I think, early 50s or somewhere around there, who got the vaccine and 16 hours or so later died. And he died because he had hemorrhagic stroke in his brain. He had what's called ITP, immunologic thrombocytopenia, which means the platelets or the blood cells in the body that protect against hemorrhaging, they maintain the homeostasis or equilibrium between bleeding and not bleeding, were decimated. So that person bled endogenously in his brain and died. Now here's the thing, though. There is a relationship to having the vaccine and dying, but is it cause and effect? That's something we don't know, because ITP, Richard, it happens. The incidence about 3 in 100,000. So if you do the math, till yesterday, we had about 11 million people who were vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So the probability dictates that the occurrence of ITP isn't going to disappear just because you had vaccine. So it doesn't incriminate vaccine or indemnify vaccine, but it raises a question: could it be related? We don't know yet. The only other significant side effect has been the anaphylactic reaction, and that's 29 people in 11 million. So all things being safe, all things being equal, the safety so far is phenomenal. But if you're the wife of the doctor, the world ends.
Yeah, that's horrible. Final question here. I've read that we're going to have a new Johnson & Johnson vaccine that is queuing up here. I heard it's a little different, but if it's effective, then anything we can get on the market is going to help. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think that's a vaccine that's different than these two, because these are the precise targeted messenger RNA based, and Johnson & Johnson is based on the old technology, where a dead virus is going to be a vector or a mail delivery person who's going to take a spike protein and deliver inside the cells, and then the virus itself doesn't reproduce. And the spike protein creates antibodies in the system. The benefit of that is that Johnson & Johnson vaccine it's a single dose, and it's based on old technologies, and it's very easy to keep. So you don't require the special refrigerators and freezing requirements. So all those things, the portability, the ease of just one shot. And as far as the efficacy, it still looks, we don't have the data. We're going to have good data in about a couple of weeks. But based on all other vaccines and the fact that the genome of this virus has been very stable, I'm very optimistic it's going to be very effective vaccine, and another tool in our repertoire that's going to help defeat the pandemic.
Yeah, and obviously not interchangeable with the Moderna or Pfizer because of the way it is. Do we know when that would be hitting the market? Do we know?
I think it's going to be another 2-3 months. I read yesterday they were delayed by a couple of weeks in their development cycle, but it's going to be April or so.
Okay, very good. All right, we've run out of time. Dr. Bridge Bombay, so great talking to you. I hope you have a good long weekend. Are you guys off on Monday for MLK Day?
I am in medicine, bud.
You are never off. You're never off. Okay. All right, Dr. Bridge Bombay, have a great weekend, sir. Get out for a long run. I know you're a marathoner. Get out there and stretch legs and enjoy the weekend, sir. We'll talk to you next week.
Appreciate it, Richard. Be safe. Thank you.
Okay, buddy. You too.